Good Friday, everyone. Ken McAuliffe, the jazz vinyl lover / jazz vinyl audiophile here to talk to you today a little bit more in depth about the great editions of contemporary music label out of Germany, Ecm. Ecm was founded in 1969, Wikipedia tells me, by producer Manfred Eicher and two other partners. And there's a little confusion. The earliest Ecm records are really on Japo, J-A-P-O, and you can see the aesthetic of the covers and the labels and the music was already in place then, with people like Wolfgang Downer, a few other ones. I don't know if perhaps that was Eicher's label before Ecm, I don't know, but that's the early days in 1969. They have gone on to carve out their own very distinctive, unique sound. Producer Manfred Eicher is as much of the Ecm as any of the musicians, the Ecm sound, for good and for bad. But some of the artists Ecm has recorded and made famous, I guess: Keith Jarrett, Jan Garbarek, Pat Metheny, Gary Burton, Chick Corea, Charlie Hayden, John Abercrombie, Dave Liebman, Eberhard Weber, Egberto Gismonti, Dave Holland, Terj Ripdahl, and Ralph Towner. And that's just in the quote-unquote jazz end of things. Ecm, through the years, has really become like a contemporary classical label as well. And I love all those recordings, even though they kind of flow one into the other without a lot of defining boundaries between the different players. I think that's probably part of the aesthetic. As I said, the aesthetic is as important as the music itself, for good and for bad. I know a common complaint with the 70s Ecms, and this is one I'm playing right now with Keith Jarrett and Jack DeJohnette from 1973, Ruda and Danya, is that, and I'm not sure if it's true on this record, but Eicher goes for a sound that is about as far from mono as one could get. Distractingly so. The drums often sound like you're sitting in the drummer's chair, because a ride cymbal will be over here, and a snare drum over there, and a hi-hat over there, which is kind of a disjointed way to do it. I mean, you're taking advantage of the stereo plane, but as a listener, it can be a little disconcerting if you're like actually paying attention, which I don't really care. Some of my favorite Ripdahl records, Terj Ripdahl with Jack DeJohnette, I mean, the music is so gorgeous and immense and flowing, and it's not really free, but it's free in its attitude to go anywhere. I'm not really paying that much attention to, how low is the bass end and where it's going. But in saying that, they're beautifully recorded records. So I just thought I would run through a few of my favorites. And I sort of feel like, I don't know how any jazz fan could not like Ecm. Outstanding performances, high watershed of improvisation from players who are still some of the greatest players on the planet, period. Some better known than others, particularly when we're talking about the 70s vinyl era. Now, they have been kind of slow to get on the reissue bandwagon, which is weird because their records, they're not easy to find, especially the early ones. They're very hard to find. And when you do find them, they're usually in pretty good shape. I think the kind of person who would buy an Ecm record is someone who takes care of the records. They always came in beautiful rice paper sleeves. They all have very iconic photography on the cover. This is a great one. Terj Ripdahl, Miroslav Vitas, Jack DeJohnette, to be continued. This record just starts and just rises and floats in the air, and then it turns into a thunderstorm, and then it turns into a waterfall. It's just beautiful improvisation of the highest order. Now, some of Ripdahl's guitar effects might leave you cold, or maybe they're a little dated, but I think it's a very beautiful sound. I saw him once when I covered the Copenhagen Jazz Festival, playing with a big band. Around that time, I think it was Crime Jazz or Crime Noir or something, Ripdahl, and he had all these samples he was using from like old movies and stuff. It was kind of cool, but I still love the 70s period most. But that's a great one, to be continued. There's two different Ecms. If you find the records pressed in the USA by Warner's or the German imports. Most people feel like the German imports have better sound quality, and they do sell for a little bit more. But either way, I mean, they're great recordings. And as I was saying, they've been a little slow to get in the reissue game. They've done a few things, but they've really done very little of their back catalog, which is strange. I don't understand it. I mean, I guess I assume that Ecm is owned by Universal. I could be wrong. And Universal has definitely stepped up their reissue game for Impulse now and Verve. So I don't know why Eicher is just dragging his feet. Could it be because classical buyers prefer digital anyway, and that's who Eicher thinks his audience is. I don't know. Anyway, Ralph Tanner, a brilliant guitarist, I think he's 90, you know, one of the great artists on this label, has always been on this label, just a very beautiful, articulate, flowing sound. I mean, how many acoustic guitarists can improvise freely with Jan Garbarek, Eberhard Weber, and John Christensen? John Christensen is sort of the house drummer for ECM, and he's like DeJohnette, but he's a little more, I wouldn't say contained. He's just as artistic, just as beautiful a player, just a different language. So Ralph Tanner, you can't go wrong with any Ralph Tanner records. Enrico Rava, a trumpet player, he did a bunch of records on ECM, and they're solid 70s offerings, very kind of moody and dark. As I said, there's really, I feel like, no bad ECM records. You can find some really outrageous ones. This is perhaps the most rocking John Abercrombie, Timeless with DeJohnette and great Jan Hammer. This is just, you know, Hendrix-inspired, straight-ahead free jazz. I don't know what to call it, but they are blowing the walls down on this record. If you're I mean, this was probably one of the first ECM records I had because I made my way from rock to jazz. So when I got this record, I was like, holy crap, because Abercrombie is still in the throes of Hendrix then, obviously. And there are many Jack DeJohnette records on ECM. I think they're all great. They don't sound dated. Jack is such a forward-thinking guy. I think he did like 15 records for ECM, and they're all really, really beautiful and unusual. This is one of my favorites, New Directions live in Europe. This is just off the chain. Who's on this record? Let's look this up, I forgot. This is Lester Bowie, John Abercrombie, and Eddie Gomez. There they are playing live, and this is just, I mean, I paid $5 for this at Jazz Record Center because it's the cutout. $5. Absolute blowing the walls down. And you know, you can hear the audience is really into it. Another DeJohnette, Untitled. This is probably a little bit harder to find now than it was, but worth searching for. Another ECM classic, Chick Corea, Return to Forever. Return to Forever and Light as a Feather. These are the records with Ierto on drums, Flor Prima on vocals, Chick playing primarily electric piano, proving his mastery of that instrument in the late 60s, early 1970s. Joe Farrell, Flora Purim, Ierto, and Stanley Clarke. I mean, if you don't have this record, to me this is one of the top 50 greatest jazz records of all time. Just flowing, beautiful, jewel-like, crystalline, all those sort of words. This is a really early Bill Frisell record, in line, quite hard to find, and even then he has his trademark sound. Who's on this record? You can see this is a very young Bill Frisell. Looks like, kind of reminds me of the Donald Sutherland character in Animal House. You know, the woman who's the friends of, you know what I'm talking about. If you've seen Animal House, looks like that. But what year is this? This is 1983. Just Bill Frisell and Errol Anderson on bass. Worth looking into. Jan Garbarek is still on ECM all these years later. Jan Garbarek is an acquired taste for me. He sort of sounds like a deer screaming out in the woods, but I imagine that's why a lot of people like him. But the records are all really consistent. Bubba Stenson piano, Polly Danielson bass, John Christensen again from drums, Wichi Taito from 1974. Yes. And this is a much more recent ECM offering, trumpeter Arv Henriksen, Cartography. And to me, this record is very moody. It has a lot to do with, it reminds me of the American Clave label by Kip Hanrahan, which I'd like to get into at some point. Kip Hanrahan's records on American Clave had, you know, Carmen Lundy, Cassandra Wilson, all New York-centric players. There's like a real churning barrio thing happening there, as well as a very noirish thing. It's very much New York City in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you see those records, Kip Hanrahan, Desire Develops an Edge, I forget some of the names of the other one. Kip Hanrahan, they brought out, when Astor Piazzolla had a Tango Zero Hour in the early 90s, which was a revolution in Argentine Tango. A lot of people thought that Piazzolla should be, hung. That came out on American Clave. It had a very silvery label. That's a beautiful record. He continues to release stuff, but at a much slower pace. But he did Hand in Hand on American Clave, released about 6 albums or so in the mid to late 90s. I'm not sure exactly. I have them here somewhere. But anyway, it's finally summer here in New York City. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for watching my videos. Subscribe if you like. At some point, I'll do some giveaways. I have so many records, I'm drowning in records. At the Jazz Vinyl Lovers group, I give away records occasionally, come up with a crazy question. So perhaps I'll do that here. Anyway, have a great weekend. Thanks for checking in. Bye-bye.